This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome, everybody. Our first ever in-season edition of Inside the Paint.
In preseason. We'll take baby steps. And then next week it'll be in exhibition season. And then finally it'll be in season. Yeah.
That's right. But I think, Ira, and we mentioned this during the crossover, that it was so nice to kind of be back out there in some semblance of normalcy and actually be able to talk to guys on a platform that wasn't like this, that we were actually able to kind of get out there. So, we want to keep this interactive. So you guys make sure to drop some of your questions, anything that you want to ask us about our impressions of the team, our takeaways from Media Day. And also Ira was out there for the first day of practice as well. Make sure to drop them in the chat and we'll get to them as we go along. But, I think, Ira, what we'd like to do today is kind of go by and player by player, what was our major takeaway from Media Day? So I want to start here. I want to start at the top with Jimmy Butler. And so what I did was I wrote down one word for every player that we were able to talk to that I took away after speaking to these guys. And I'll kind of elaborate on it a little bit. But the word that I took away with Jimmy Butler was championship. And it was because we were talking to him and we were going back and forth on who was doing the one-on-ones. And Will Manso asked him, hey, and he started off, he said, hey, Jimmy, I hate to get all big picture this early in the season, blah, blah, blah. And Jimmy immediately cut him off and said championship. And it was so pointed that he didn't even need Will to finish the question. Jimmy does not care. And I think we knew this, that's the number one goal for him. But he doesn't care how it happens. He doesn't care what has to happen along the way in order to get that ring. But I felt like coming out of this thing that, number one, Jimmy Butler is so comfortable with this group now. And a lot of that is bringing in a Kyle Lowry and some guys who are like-minded. But I also felt like there's this extra sense of responsibility for him that it is his team now. It is built in many ways in his image to go out there and get this ring for this city.
Yeah, Clay, I would like to believe that, and I believe that comes from a good place with Jimmy. But, Clay, you remember this. Before the playoff series against Milwaukee, when Jimmy said, remember, he was like stupidly ready or whatever, or locked in, and he was good to go. And then he was not much better than anyone on the court that series, or even his current teammate, PJ Tucker. So you can talk the talk. And Jimmy had until last season's playoffs. He had through the playoff run in 2020. He had when he was healthy and on the court last season. He missed 20 games. COVID got in the way there. But after the bombast turned into something less than substantial during the playoffs, I think Jimmy sort of lost a little bit of the talking card, a little bit of the bombast card because of the way it played out. So I think it's time for him to sort of back it up on the court as well. Look, I love the confidence. That's the only thing Jimmy is. Jimmy would have told you in Minnesota he was looking for a championship. In Chicago he was, certainly before Kawhi shot, bounced 3 times off the rim there and with the Toronto series when he was in Philadelphia. But I need to see it more now after he put the words out before last season's playoffs, and there was something less than tangible that he produced. So I love that he's confident, but show me. Show me with an early season statement. Show me with this chemistry. Show me in the standings. And ultimately, show me in the playoffs. I think Jimmy's sort of talking the talk now has to step aside a little bit to more of, after last season's playoffs, walking the walk.
Yeah, but I also think that, you can look at many ways last season as just being so odd. And at the same time, yes, maybe you take away a little bit of it because of what happened in the playoffs. And yet at the same time, he clearly was not 100% healthy. I don't know that anybody on this team was. And they weren't going to make excuses about what happened with that short off season, the dealing with COVID and all this. And everybody dealt with the COVID situation last year in their own ways. Every team did. And yet no team had a smaller offseason, a shorter offseason than the Heat and the Lakers. So I get it. And yet I just kind of walked away from this feeling like Jimmy, it felt to me like this is his team, his organization. And actually, we got a good question about this. And I think maybe you can give some insight into this. Big Gary asks, did Jimmy have any input on the new players who were brought in. And I'll say straight up, I mean, clearly with Kyle Lowry, and even Kyle Lowry said that, hey, look, we're buddies, we're friends, and we'll talk about, most importantly, it's life stuff that we talk about. But yeah, he kept asking me. He kept asking me, and he would say, look, you do what's best for you, but. So if he was pestering Kyle Lowry about coming to Miami, that he was all in with Pat Riley and Andy Ellisberg and Eric Spoelstra to make it happen.
It's interesting, and I know you had a camera there for Local 10 at yesterday's practice also, and then Jimmy tried to back off a little, and he pointed to the executive table, and he said, look, it's not about me. It's about Pat Riley and Andy Ellisberg and Mickey Arison. Those are the guys who decides who's here. Those are the guys who convince based on their body of work. Those are the guys who helped this team win three championships. I didn't. So I think he tried to pull back a little. And I think that's interesting. It's sort of, when you are the puppet master, you also don't want to let other guys know that you're pulling their strings.
Right.
So this notion of Jimmy gets what Jimmy wants is all well and good. But then if Markieff Morris isn't playing, is it because Jimmy doesn't want him playing? Then if the Heat go big and PJ Tucker doesn't play as much, is it because Jimmy doesn't want that? So there's a fine line there. I think with young players, you can play that card. I'm Jimmy damn Butler, and I've been here effing longer than you have, and that's the way it is. But with so many veterans, that's a real fine line. And that's why even last year, when the Heat named captains, they had to be a little bit careful. It's just easier to keep Udonis Haslem as the captain. It's accepted. He's Cap. I mean, he's it.
Right.
He's always going to wear that C. He's the guy, because then all of a sudden, if you choose guys and you choose Jimmy, but not Goran, or you bypass Bam, even this year when you name captains, it's a lot easier, because who is the captain of this year's team actually? We know it's Udonis, okay? But who is the captain? Is it Jimmy Butler because everything's built around him? Is it Kyle Lowry because he's the quarterback on the floor? Is it Bam Adebayo because he clearly is the future of the franchise? So what you do is you put that all aside and you say, no, it's Udonis Haslem. Now he might not get on the court, but when he does, he's going to be the captain, and you go from there. So I think even Jimmy realizes now he has to be a little bit careful about over-asserting. It's one thing with young players, and he knows how it played out in Chicago and Minnesota and Philadelphia, and he knows you can get a reputation. You know what, Clay? You can have all the reputation you want as a champion. LeBron James is an SOB, but he gets to the finals just about every year, and he's won his championships, so he can do and say as he wants. Jimmy Butler's not there yet. Hey, when Jimmy Butler wins his championships, oh my God, that ego is going to be out of control. But he's smart.
And this is where I think it's really interesting with the Kyle Lowry thing. And you're talking about, who is the captain on this team, right? And there was a story. I think it was Zach Lowe who wrote this last a few months ago. It was great, but basically, essentially saying that, look, last year, Jay Crowder wasn't there to tell Jimmy Butler, hey, chill. Stop, slow down. And
Great
so
point.
one of the questions I had for Kyle Lowry was, Kyle said in the initial Zoom, and we'll get to Kyle now.
Sure.
Kyle said in the initial Zoom when he was signed that it's his job to essentially play. Now, this is my phrase here.
Sure.
Good cop to Jimmy's bad cop.
Perfect.
Like, it's his job to kind of stand in between. And so I asked him, I said, how do you play that liaison role? How are you going to be that guy who's kind of the barrier between Jimmy, who can be uber fiery and out there? And yes, you're right. I mean, be the puppet master in many ways. He doesn't want to be viewed as such, but there is this perception that what Jimmy wants, Jimmy gets. And Kyle said something interesting. He said, look, I've been in this league for 16 years. I know which players need a little coddling. I know which players need to be screamed at. And I thought that was very interesting. And for the most part, the word that I wrote down for Kyle Lowry was reserved. He was not at media day the type of player who was ready to spill his guts, give you his life story. But if you ask him the right questions, I feel like he was willing to tell you what his mindset is heading into this season. And my big takeaway with Kyle Lowry was he is going to be a softer, gentler version of what Jay Crowder was, in that last year there was nobody in many ways to keep Jimmy Butler in check. And so when Jimmy was in practice, and by the way, Jimmy knows this. Jimmy respected Jay Crowder because he was willing to kind of step in and call him out in many ways. Jimmy needs that. I think that's why he brought in Kyle Lowry and Ira. My impression, you tell me if you felt the same way, is that that's kind of going to be the role that maybe the most important role that Kyle Lowry plays with this team.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Clay. And Jimmy even mentioned it yesterday about Kyle. He said, you know what? He kept it loose. He kept it fun. He's professional, but he put that. So that is the yin and the yang that you're talking about. That Jimmy's the guy who in Minnesota stormed off the court during a practice while wearing his Rolex and made his statement and stormed out of the locker room with Fred Hoiberg in Chicago. So Kyle can be that balance. There are a lot of stories about Kyle being immature when he first got to Toronto and then sitting down there with the coaches and them telling him, hey, you're at a crossroads here. Do you want to be a leader and a veteran who's going to play into your 15th and 16th year like you are now?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you going to be a guy who's never going to be that true leader as a point guard? And he turned that way. So, Clay, I think you're absolutely spot on in that case. And I think what's going to be really interesting to another name we'll eventually get to here is if Jimmy is bad cop and Kyle is good cop, which cop is Bam Adebayo? And I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you saw this. I know you follow Instagram a lot in the Heat's social media. They did this shot. They obviously working for Media Guard and something like that, where they all were poised like Charlie's Angels. You remember, they were standing straight with the little gun on each side, like, the various incarnations in movies and TV. And Kyle in the middle of it, and he didn't know, why are we doing this? Younger than than most of us. And Jimmy goes, man, it's Charlie's Angels. And I love what Kyle said. He goes, we black, that we ain't no Charlie's Angels. And I just thought that kind of perspective to break up the room a little bit is perfect, that he has that other side. It might drive Eric Spoelstra to distraction at times, and that's the other part of it. I know we're discussing players today, but Eric Spoelstra is going to have to sort of mesh his way in with all that also. You can't let the inmates fully take over the asylum, but when you have a veteran team, you can't coach it like you were coaching your team of draft choices with young Bam and young Tyler Hero and young Precious Achiuwa. So it's going to be an adjustment also. Eric had that with the big three, but Clay, that's been 6 or 7 years already. So it's going to be an adjustment for him also. Lots of personalities in this locker room.
So we'll get to Bam after the break, but let's talk about Spo since you're leading into that.
Okay.
And what I wrote down for Spo was Eye of the Tiger. And it was the second we sat down with him, and like everybody had, I will say that everybody we talked to, other than Kyle, who was clearly like he's done this 16 years. He actually said that. He said, look, I've been here 16 years. I've done the media day thing.
Right.
Like we'll get to know him a little bit better. Everybody else was laughing, joking, having fun. Spo wasn't about that life on Monday.
No.
He sat down, and I'm not going to say that he likes preseason and training camp better than the postseason, but I'm not going to say he doesn't. I feel like Ira, like he lives for these, what they call them, the Hunger Games practices. And so to your point about stepping in and kind of being the one who is the ultimate voice in the room, there's going to be that balance where we're going to have these crazy Miami Heat style practices. And we went out and we got guys who we know are willing to put in the work. And when it gets right down to it, they know when it's time to get down to business. And Spo, I think, was ready to do that on Monday morning. Like he was ready to get out there. So there is going to be that balance. And I'm going to be curious as it goes along. You said there's all these different personalities, and I think you're exactly right. I think you've got Spo, who's probably way over on this side, although he's shown his ability to let his hair down, especially when Right. But I do think that having him and Kyle, you talk about the yin and the yang. I think having somebody like Kyle, much like with Jimmy, he's going to be able to step in when Spo goes after someone for messing up. I think Kyle will be able to walk over a few minutes later and say, look, to your point, that Kyle needed to grow up a little bit and needed to mature when he was younger, can go over to whoever the player is, whether it's somebody like Tyler Hero, who we'll talk about in a little bit as well. Say, look, I've been through this. Like I had a coach yell at me for the same thing, 15 years ago. This is how I dealt with it. And I think that's where, and that gets back to your captain thing. Whoever the captain is, he'll have that personality.
And that's the thing about Spo. With 10 new players in camp, does he have to coach more? Because the Heat really haven't had this kind of turnover in a while. Or because of so many veterans in camp, does he have to coach less and let them find their way also So I think that's sort of going to be a little bit of an adjustment. He loves the laboratory. Yes, your point about preseason playoffs is spot on for this reason. In playoffs, there's an unbelievable amount of media. It gets out of control. You can't be you anymore.
Yes.
As we saw Media Day, a little bit lighter this year, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. Yesterday at practice, a bit fewer. All you big famous TV people had to be out at Dolphins and at Hurricanes. I understand they're playing on Thursday, and that's fine. I honestly expect by like today, and the reason we do the shows earlier this time of year is I have to get down to practice. It could be me, Anthony Chang from the Herald, maybe Tim Reynolds from the AP, and that's it. And Spoelstra loves that. You know, most coaches go, where is everybody? And Spoelstra is more like, this is good.
Get out of here.
You can each ask one question. I'll be out of here in 5 minutes. This is what he sort of relishes. So the fact that Heat training camp also comes under the shadow of football in South Florida is even all the better for Spoelstra. It's like, hey, we'll see you October 21st for the opener. Now everyone go away. Yeah. So I think that's why he enjoys this time of year as well.
Hawaiian Punch asks us as we go to break, any idea where Ben Simmons lands and how it affects you? It's amazing how every day this saga just seems to get crazier and crazier. No feel yet, but my guess would be it's going to be somewhere in the West. And I think there have been a couple of reports that's where Philadelphia is targeting to send him anyway. You
always try to create distance with players like that. Sure. You don't want them to burn you in the standings. You don't want to play them in the playoffs. You know, if you can avoid that, all the better. Yes, you know, you might say you can work out a trade with someone who has more chips or a Boston with a Jaylen Brown or something, but you don't want to all of a sudden in the first round, best of 7, you know, okay, you talked like Clay about Hunger Games. That would be the ultimate Hunger Game. So, you know, this is going to play out for a while. The games don't matter. The paychecks might, but the games don't. And not a good look for Philadelphia. When we get sort of around the NBA at the end of our show today, we can sort of talk about that ongoing impact as well.
Yeah, and I would say this too, Ira, and this is the big problem as we head into break for Philadelphia. I think what they think they should be getting for Ben Simmons relative to offers and what other teams are willing to give at this point, there's a significant gulf. And by the way, there were reports that there was a significant gulf before all of this happened, back when Doc Rivers said at the end of the season that he wasn't sure if they could move forward with Ben Simmons before it got really heated. So coming up, we're going to talk about our impressions of Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, PJ Tucker, anybody else that you want to ask about, make sure to drop it in the chat. We will roll on right here on Inside the Paint. Welcome back to Inside the Paint here on the Big O Radio Show. So we're kind of giving you our impressions of Media Day, what we took away from each player. Make sure to drop your questions in the chat here. And please, if you have a finger free, hit that like button for us. It does us a big favor. Smash it.
The like button.
Smash it. So
as
like maybe that's with your
as
thumb.
The kids in Big O say, exactly.
Maybe that's with your thumb, right? Like you can't smash with an index finger or a pinky finger. So Bam Adebayo, the big impression that I walked away with him was vindication. And Bam's great, by the way. And you know, he's one of the guys. I think I asked him 3 questions and he talked for like 15 minutes. To the point where they finally came by and they were like rapping. They're like, all right, he has to be done. He has to be done. He has to go now. You know, and he's one of the guys who I was most excited to see again because it's been a long time. You know, we saw him out at, he went out to Surfside, saw me at the arena for Heat camp, but like in a setting where you could actually have a conversation with a guy. But this is Bam. This is like, he can be the nicest guy in the world, the nicest human being in the world. And yet, if you saw The Last Dance with Michael Jordan and how he kind of like can have these things that he holds on to hold a grudge against guys, I was trying to gently delve into the topic. I wanted to talk about the Olympics, but I wanted to gently ask about his relationship with Greg Popovich. And so I asked him, the way I phrased the question, because I went to the Ira Winderman School of Asking Questions, was,
nice.
Bam, how did it feel after not making Team USA the last time around? How did it feel to go there and win a gold medal? And he looked at me and he goes, oh, I told Pop he was wrong. Like he immediately, like I didn't even have to mention Greg Popovich's name and he immediately went there. So, you know, the thing with Bam, and this was my big takeaway Ira with Bam, is he can be the nicest guy in the world. He can just, I mean, especially you see him with kids. I mean, but the fire inside of that guy, and you know, the first thing when you see him walk in this year is he's noticeably bigger, and I think he said he's up to 260. But there's something burning inside of him now that, forget about the fact he signed the max contract off season before last. I think you're going to see a different Bam Adebayo out there, not just because of who he is physically, but also that experience with Team USA. I think there's a confidence level that is higher than it's ever been before.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just posted a story at sunsentinel.com with some of the quotes you spoke about. One where he said he has a chip embedded on his shoulder, which I think with all the vaccine stories, I don't know if that's the word I would have gone with, but hey, it was his word. And how that chip can make a monster out of him, which is important also. Clay, let's take a step back, including what you spoke to him about with the Olympic team. You can make an argument that Bam Adebayo right now is the best U.S.-born center in the NBA.
Yes.
I think we'd agree. You will bring his name up a bunch. Nikola Jokic, obviously Serbian, best center, MVP. Joel Embiid, obviously from Africa, dominant center there. Rudy Gobert, excuse me, my French friends, from France, obviously the best defensive center. Then you get probably to Bam and Karl Anthony Towns, I think we would talk about. You talk about a one-way center in Towns and his offense, Bam a two-way center. So Bam sort of already is in a pretty good place. And Eric Spoelstra, you were there for that also. He said, hey, this talk that Bam is coming off an off season or that Bam has somehow regressed. Here's the deal, Clay. Bam has not met our expectations because he keeps starting to raise the bar, and we want to see the bar go even further. So, Bam gets a floater. We want a mid-range shot. Bam gets a mid-range shot. We want a three-point shot. Bam can guard 1 through 5. We want him to guard 5 better. So it's just a matter of Bam keeps raising the bar, and we keep going, if he can go to A to B, can he go from A to C and D and E and all the way down the alphabet? So that's the thing. I think it's a good thing. And I think it's a good push-pull we have with Bam. We, including Heat fans, expect more. And he takes all of those as a challenge and as a chip on his shoulder. I think that's how you grow as a player. I don't think Bam believes he has arrived. And because of that, he's going to strive to do a little bit more. So he's never going to accept the fact that Greg Popovich didn't think he was good enough for the previous World Cup team.
Yes.
Or that Greg Popovich early in the Olympic cycle was playing Draymond Green at center ahead of him. So all these little things are very good and work for us. And you know what? If he has to get a chip embedded, all the better because it keeps him going. I think, and I hate to be long-winded here and I apologize, this goes the other way now. Now Eric Spoelstra has to, one, free him up on offense to maybe shoot more of the three-pointers, but also just because Bam can do something, we've spoken 100%. About it, doesn't mean he has to. Why does he have to switch to the 1-5 pick and rolls to start the game, and then the other center just rolls inside against your undersized whatevers and gets a dunk or a layup? Yes, I know we can guard point guards. I know Bam can guard shooting guards. And at the moment of truth, at the end of a game, if you want to switch everything, because you also have Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry and Victor Oladipo and PJ Tucker out there, God bless you. Hold that in reserve for the moment of truth when a coach will tell you in a timeout with 3 seconds to go, switch everything. But why, with 47 minutes and 23 seconds left on the shot clock, do you have to switch everything then? Let him be a center. Let him be under the basket. Let him get the rebounds the Heat didn't get against Milwaukee. And I think that's tough for a coach. Coaches love to go to the laboratory. Coaches love to experiment. Coaches love to call the same stupid wildcat play on first and second and goal from the 1 yard line.
Don't even get me going on that one.
So I'm saying, yes, coaches want to try to trick things up. Sometimes it's the old KISS, keep it simple, fill in the last word there. I think Bam Adebayo's growth is clearly a factor of Bam Adebayo, number 1 and 1A, but I also think it's a factor of Eric Spoelstra.
Well, and to get back to your point about the switching 1 through 5, just because Bam Adebayo, and I remember distinctly, it was in the game in Phoenix, and it happened against Denver too. But in Phoenix, when they were on that road trip, just because Bam Adebayo can guard Chris Paul or Devin Booker doesn't mean that Duncan Robinson or whoever is playing point guard can guard DeAndre Ayton. And that's what ended up happening every time. So there is a trickle-down effect when you switch. I love watching Bam Adebayo guard Steph Curry, but does that mean that you end up...
And Clay, and if it was one-on-one, I'll
exactly,
sit there,
exactly,
I'll get my popcorn
exactly.
and I'll eat it all up, but it's
yes.
not.
Yeah, and if you're, to your point, late game situations, if you're going with your 5 best defensive players and you have somebody like a Victor Oladipo out there who could potentially guard one of those players. So it does get, yes, 100% agree with you. I want to say this about Bam too, and this goes back to your point about just because he can do all of things. I thought it was very telling that he's up to 260 because that was clearly, and I think he said he was down to what, 225 last year because of after the short off season.
Sure.
He had the shoulder injury. So clearly he was not able to maintain the body weight that it took to take the pounding inside. I think you're going to see Bam Adebayo inside a lot more. I don't think it's an accident that he's up to 260. And by the way, he was able to do that despite the fact that so much of his offseason was spent working with the Olympic team. And Ira, again, this is where you kind of like, you have to be around players to get that real takeaway. Bam's 260. It's not like a bodybuilder. He's been out there like doing nothing but 12 reps, whatever. It's legit mass and size. And it's the type that, he'll probably get down to 245, 250 potentially after this Hunger Games off.
Sure.
Exactly. Yes. That's what I'm getting at. There's going to be a wear of the season. So when you see Bam Adebayo, he may not look like a bodybuilder out there right now. He may look a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker. You're going to need that if you're going to be inside getting rebounds. So it almost feels to me, Ira, like this is pointed. This was something the Heat staff wanted him to do, and they'll never tell us this, but it almost felt like this is what they want him to do in order to play more inside, which, by the way, may kill our dreams of having a big lineup anytime soon.
Yeah, but you know what? I think they mean playing inside defensively more so, Clay. Because
for sure. Getting rebounds, that sort of thing.
I think offensively, you need the lane clear for Jimmy Butler to create his contact. You need the lane clear for Kyle Lowry to create and facilitate off the dribble drive also, for Tyler Hero to get into the paint. So I think it's a matter of, and I spoke to Tyler about this, and I always speak to players about when you add muscle, do you feel it could affect your agility? Could it impact your quickness? So there is sort of both ways of looking at that situation there. The real question is here, and I get this to ask at AskIra@sunsettle.com a bunch. When is Eric Spoelstra just going to realize Bam Adebayo is a power forward? Let him do the thing that all the league's versatile power forwards are doing. And maybe we do get a little bit more to that with Dwayne Dedmon, with Omar Yurtseven, that they let him play a little bit more as a 4. Because you know what? We're not only through 4 years into the 5th year, into the extension, but we're now at a point where it's go time for Bam. And should we have, in those first 4 seasons, and I know Hassan Whiteside was here at the start and it was hard, have made a decision, we still have yet to see, on a consistent basis, really almost on any basis, Bam with a big. I mean, you can tell me about Myers Leonard and Kelly Olynyk, but they were out there shooting threes.
Right.
They're not big. They're not intimidating big men. They're not rebounding big men. But what about him and Dedmon? What about him and Yurtseven? At least in the preseason, give it a run, try it out, see if it works, and then maybe you could even get a little bit more to who and what Bam Adebayo is. And you might be right. Like we just said, he might be your second best domestic center, so why take him out of that role? But explore everything before you run out of exploration time.
I guess, and this would be what I think is the thinking, all right? I'm not saying right or wrong, but I think to your point, yes, you have him bulk up so that he can play the 5 defensively and handle the pounding down there, go inside, get the rebounds, do what the Heat needed against the Bucks that they clearly were not able to do in the playoffs. That's why you put on the size. Because I think the feeling is if you play him at the 5 offensively, then you're forcing the other team to adjust. And it's a lot harder. And again, we saw this in the NBA Finals when, game 1, the Lakers were able to dominate on the boards, and they were able to play the massive lineup where you had Dwight Howard and Anthony Davis out there.
And LeBron,
and LeBron, yes. But as that series went on, the Heat were able to kind of impose, even with Bam playing at, 50%? Once he came back.
And missing the time when Myers Leonard started,
They adjusted, and it got to the point where they played Dwight Howard off the floor. And by game 6, and look, by that point, the attrition had set in. But I think that's the vision from Eric Spoelstra. It's if Bam is able to be the 5 defensively, if he's able to be the guy who's grabbing the rebounds, blocking shots inside, then you're forcing the other team to make a really tough decision on the other end of the floor. But to your point, Ira, it didn't play out that way last year. Okay, the other player who we saw bulking up was Tyler Hero. And the word that I wrote down for him, and it had nothing to do with his body, was Tyler Hero was glowing. Ira, that man looked like a different human being. And I think it may have been because when he walked over, it was myself and our photographer David Silver, and both of us combined have 6 girls and no boys, 6 daughters and no sons. And so the first thing we mentioned was about it. He looks, I've never seen anybody whose eyes light up like that when you mention his new baby. So, and so we talked about his daughter a little bit, and then it immediately transitions into that's now his why. It's why he shows up to the arena. And, it felt to me, Ira, like, and yes, I know put up or shut up, but it felt to me like a different Tyler Hero. It felt like somebody who had something new to play for. And again, not trying to sound naive and idealistic about this, but that was my takeaway was, man, he seems different. He seems more comfortable with the media. He seems ready to kind of step into this new role of not just being a dad, but also being a more mature player on the floor.
Yeah, I think there are 2 factors. Obviously, fatherhood, we all know, changes you and gives you perspective that, hey, they're ripping me in basketball, but I still got diapers to change and try to catch 2 hours sleep here along the way. I totally get that. Clay, I think as part 2, when Tyler spoke to us about this on Media Day also, the fact that he had a real off season this year,
Yes.
even working with the select Olympic team briefly in Las Vegas and going against Bam and being there with Spo, he needed that exhale. It all came at him so quickly, including being relied upon to help get the Heat to the 2020 NBA Finals. So I think the fact that he got a chance to sort of exhale, he's now breathing again. He's now more being himself than a guy constantly on this hamster wheel and going. It reminds me when Will Mansell takes his 2-week vacation and Clay Ferraro is anchoring at 6, 10, 11, going out in the field. I mean, honestly, we all know what that's like when you're constantly on that hamster wheel and doing so much more. Remember, it was a compacted schedule last season. There was a point in that Philadelphia series, the Heat were down to 8 players. It was Tyler Hero or bust where they didn't have anyone else. He pushed as hard as he could, and he was pulled in so many directions. We've spoken about this before in Pallet Rack City inside the paint. In previous weeks, he was a point guard last season. He was a shooting guard. He was a starter. He was a reserve. He was a facilitator. He was instant offense. He was asked to do so much at his age, and I think now he's more mature to handle all that. I think that he realized they put way too much on his plate. And again, and it goes back to a name we spoke in our first segment today, that's another one of these areas where Kyle Lowry helps. Kyle Lowry is going to be the sort of antidote for like 6 or 7 issues around the team. Jimmy Butler doesn't have to handle as much. The Heat have an answer stopping opposing point guards. Tyler Hero or Goran Dragic, don't have to do it like they did with Goran traded now. So I think that helps Tyler. He's in a better place. He's in a better place life-wise, obviously with the birth of his daughter and being a more complete person. He's also in a better place because what he picked up intellectually the last 12 months, I think will help carry him forward. That when you do have people who go on the Big O show and Pallet Rock City inside the paint and talk about him, I think he learns to, okay, that's what those guys do. They bloviate. There's no one worse than Stephen A. Smith and Clay Ferraro, and I understand that, but he doesn't take it into the gym. That's the difference. Stephen A. might be at a different pay grade, but in general, he understands the bloviation of it. I think he gets it. And I think once you get it, it makes it so much easier to go through this grind.
So we're going to go through some more players coming up, guys like PJ Tucker, our impressions of them. Also Victor Oladipo. And I'm curious to get your take on what you took away from Victor Oladipo, because he said something to us that I found very interesting. So we're going to get into that coming up next.
We got a lot to cover. Quit going late on these breaks,
in like 12 minutes.
You're a TV guy. Come on.
Okay. Inside the Paint coming up next. Welcome back. Final segment here on Inside the Paint. Clay Ferraro here, Ira Winderman there. Make sure to drop your questions there in the chat. Anything that you may have to ask about Media Day, the season. We'll get to all of it coming up in just a little bit. But, we were talking about various players and our takeaways from Media Day. We mentioned Victor Oladipo heading into the break. And something that I found interesting talking to him that he said to me was, and it was kind of a moment of clarity. He said, I forgot what it was like to be healthy. And we were talking about last season, and I asked him, when did you feel your best? He said, in that Lakers game where I got hurt, like I finally felt like I was that
the
was the
dunks,
best.
yeah.
That was the best I felt in years. And then he goes up there and you have the dunk where he immediately reaches and he knew something was wrong. And it kind of hit me. It was like, you go through this process, and he had made a comment, I think, to Andy Slater during, he just happened to run into him at dinner at Joe's, and he said, yeah, I plan on being back later this season. This was last year. And it kind of hit me. I think he genuinely thought he was going to be back at the end of last year. I think the Heat are going to have to make sure to protect the player from himself in many ways, or at least they did that last year. But I came away from this thinking that he's at peace knowing that there's a long game here. And he's going to have to make sure that he's as close to being whatever the level of health he is, whatever 100% is. There's a feeling of peace, I think, with him that he's not going to just come back way too soon just for the sake of coming back. He's going to want to get back out there on the floor. But I think he knows now there's a long game here.
Yeah, there's two sides to it. And also, I think he realizes he's been pushing it almost too much now for a couple of years.
Yes.
I mean, before he did his group interview, he said the other day that he feels he hasn't been healthy since December 2018.
Crazy.
So we're almost coming up on 3 years of not healthy. He also said that before this most recent surgery in May for the quadricep, he wasn't sure that he wouldn't fall over when he stood up. That's how unstable that the knee and the quadricep were, which is kind of a concern when you're coming back from that. So, yeah, I think he realizes now that he has pushed too much or too fast too often, and he got into this minimum salary 1-year contract situation, and he has to make it right. But he also, Clay, has to push back to a degree. And I mentioned this. I mentioned it with Big O also on our Accurate Pembroke Pines reports. There's going to be a cutoff for the Heat. I don't know when it is, Clay. It might be in late February, in March, or in April, when the Heat's going to have to say this is go time. This is who we are and what we are. And Tyler Hero's comfortable in his role, and I don't know, Max Strus is comfortable in his role, and we've got this thing lined up, and we can't change it now. We can't dramatically alter it. We can't change the face of who we are. Hey, we're sitting here third in the East. We didn't think that would happen. We're comfortable. So he does have to come back at some point to show he can contribute the season. The other part of it is he is on that 1-year minimum scale contract. If he doesn't show enough, he might wind up on another 1-year minimum scale contract. Look, he turned down, I think it was $122 million with Indiana before he was traded to Houston. Turned down a 2-year extension in Houston worth over $40 million. He was gambling, betting on himself. Now he's here at the minimum. I mean, a huge difference in the money there. So I think Vic wants to get back and prove himself also. He said the right things. But also you have to be careful about a player who's trying to prove himself while the team is trying to prove something also. It's a very, very delicate situation. The only given is this, Clay Ferraro. The Miami Heat will not comment at all on Victor Oladipo until he's back either practicing full-time or on the court. Even yesterday, Udonis Haslem, unfortunately, condolences to him. He lost his father. He wasn't at practice. And Eric Spoelstra basically just said very candidly, we had 18 today. We had more than enough. Didn't even mention that Vic didn't practice. Just assumed he's on the side. When he becomes a factor, I'll talk about him again. So really, from Media Day, when he spoke to everyone, he did the whole washing machine with you guys. Victor Oladipo is now out of sight, out of mind. You will hear far more Victor Oladipo talk here every Wednesday on Inside the Paint from Pallet Rack City than you will from Eric Spoelstra, likely for months to come.
Ira and I are going to be taking bets on the side on who the first new reporter is that's going to ask Eric Spoelstra about a Victor Oladipo update in a practice session.
No new updates. We have no new updates.
I had no new update. PJ Tucker, the word that I wrote down with him was speechless. And it was because I asked him about Eric Spoelstra saying that he screams Heat culture. And I said, what does that mean to you? And PJ, it was interesting. He got like this kind of, he was kind of taken aback, and he goes, wow. He's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. It seemed to be like the biggest compliment in the world that you could pay to PJ Tucker, that this thing that he's heard about with the Miami Heat, that Eric Spoelstra views him as kind of the embodiment in many ways of that. We've heard that about a lot of players. But I think for somebody like PJ Tucker, who has intentionally built his career on being that type of player, I felt like, Ira, not only is it a perfect fit, but it almost feels like with PJ Tucker, there's kind of this sense of responsibility, and there was this inevitability that he would eventually end up here. But now there's kind of a sense of responsibility to live up to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. He always calls himself a dog, D-A-W-G. And yesterday he told us at practice, we had this at the Sun Sentinel, that we're the dog pound here, that there's plenty of other dogs, that he fits right in. Apparently, there's a lot of doggy toys at practice, puppy treats, stuff like that. So it's good. As long as Eric Spoelstra provides the kibbles and bits, it'll be a fine season. He feels that he's in his element. But Clay, I've got to caution this also. It's media day. It's training camp. It's preseason. I'm not sure that PJ Tucker is necessarily locked into the role that most of us are envisioning as full-time starting power forward, regular guy in the rotation. He will experiment. We spoke about it earlier in the show today. If there is Dedmon Adebayo, big. If there is Yurtseven Adebayo, big, there'll be fewer minutes for this team's power forwards in Markieff Morris and PJ Tucker. On the other hand, if Eric Spoelstra goes back to more of seemingly his inclination of smaller lineups, we certainly could see alignments where not only do you have Duncan Robinson and Jimmy Butler on the floor along, with Kyle Lowry, but you could also have Tyler Hero out there also. You might have Max Strus out there. The Heat might go smaller. You might see Jimmy Butler or Duncan Robinson as a de facto 4. I don't know how it's going to play out for PJ Tucker because he's a great defender. Any position, pretty much. He's a good enough rebounder that if he doesn't get it, his man's not going to get it. But Clay, he doesn't score. I mean, he doesn't score at all. He has one sweet spot on the floor, that corner 3, and that's it. In today's NBA, can you afford to have any position in your starting lineup where a guy's good season is going to be averaging 5.8 points a game? So I'm not so sure that this whole PJ Tucker as panacea will necessarily play out. He says the right things. He does the right things, but does he do enough right things? I think it's going to be an interesting story to keep an eye on.
And there's going to be a difference between the Miami Heat and the 82-game regular season, who plays the bulk of the minutes and who has the bigger roles, and also the Miami Heat in each individual playoff series. And hopefully I'm saying plural
Good
playoff
there,
series,
yeah.
if there are more than one. Because and all you have to do is look back at PJ Tucker and his Milwaukee Bucks last year. The guy who became like the golden player in Milwaukee that was so beloved didn't play more than a couple of minutes against the Heat in their series, and that's Bobby Portis.
Yeah,
you had this run by the Bucks where they felt like they couldn't play him against Miami, and yet you get down to the series against Atlanta. And so for me, Ira, and how this pertains to PJ Tucker is maybe there isn't going to be that enormous role for him tonight. Maybe he's a player that starts, plays 20 minutes a game, and then you kind of forget about him in many ways as the season goes on until you play a Brooklyn in the NBA playoffs. And look, Kevin Durant's going to get his against anybody, but there's a reason why Milwaukee put PJ Tucker and Kevin Durant have a relationship. So to me, that's the type of role that he's going to bring. It's not necessarily.
And I agree to that. So it could even be a point in the season where we go, where did PJ Tucker go? And then you'll tune in every Wednesday and Clay Ferraro will tell you he's gone nowhere. Let's wait for the playoffs in his moment.
As Aaron Rodgers would say, relax. Duncan Robinson, comfortable. And Duncan's somebody, and I talked with him about this. He walked over and I said, hey, I got to tell you, I love the podcast. And I think he does a really good job on that. But, and you know this from speaking with him in person, Duncan Robinson is usually much different when you talk to him as a member of the media versus the Duncan Robinson that you see on the podcast. And it's, to me, and I told him this, I said, in this media setting, a lot of times it's so antiseptic, and it's just, it's hard to kind of build those sorts of relationships. But then the Duncan Robinson that you see when he's chatting with Karis LeVert or whoever it may be, like they're able to just kind of sit back and talk ball. And I felt like, and I don't know if you got this impression, but he was sitting back and talking ball. He was, and maybe it's because of the new contract, there's this sense of comfort now with him. But I'm curious to see Duncan Robinson now that he's got his money. He's somebody who's lived with a chip on his shoulder. But I also think there's always been it's not, I forget the exact term for it, but where he kind of felt like he wasn't meant to be here. It wasn't good. He wasn't good enough. He was always kind of living up to that.
Sure.
I'm curious to see Duncan Robinson now that his bank account says, oh no, you're worthy of this. Right. So I kind of got, the feeling that he's going to go the other way. He's going to be comfortable in his own skin moving forward. But again, like you said, that's the glow of media day. So what did you take away?
But will he be good enough as a two-way player that he could play the end game? Because if you have a $90 million player who can't play the end game, then you do wonder a little bit about it. Right now, he started as a specialist. He evolved a little more. We saw him cutting a little bit more. We see him move the ball a little more. We see him stand in defensively a little bit more. But at moments of truth, that's the difference. You know, in that playoff run in 2020, he wasn't always counted on at the end. He couldn't always be counted on at the end. Last season, we saw issues there also where there simply wasn't a defensive place for him. There might not be a defensive place for him against the Brooklyn or even against the Milwaukee. So what I want to see over the first 82 is this. Can he build up enough defensive equity and trust that come playoff time, I can feel comfortable enough to trust him? An interesting signing, because I wrote this even today at sunsettle.com, about, Jimmy Butler said we're not a big three. And one of my readers said, no, they're a big five because everyone loves the Heat in the preseason. And I said, it's interesting because we still have to see who those other two are. And is Duncan Robinson, because of his contract, definitively one of them? Will Tyler Hero emerge as that player? Will Victor Oladipo come back and be that player? So I think that the ultimate supporting cast, the ultimate closing lineup remains to be written. Duncan Robinson, by paycheck, will get that chance, but he has to prove that he can be on the floor for those moments of truth.
And when you get down to the playoffs, do you really want somebody who, hey, let's go back to what I said about when they were playing in Phoenix, who it's really easy for teams to kind of spotlight, all right, we're going to go after that guy. And look, there were times last year when Duncan Robinson started to, he's improved. He has gotten better
defensively. Totally.
So he's gotten better, and yet there's a difference between improving and getting to the level where, as you pointed out, you are playable.
Yes, his rise to defensive mediocrity, was meteoric. And it's important.
Yes,
you have to start somewhere. I would like to see Tyler Hero get to the point, honestly, that Duncan Robinson is right now. But that's an ongoing process. And you know what? Sometimes you can't. Just like Duncan Robinson can shoot threes, maybe he can't do something else in his game. That's what you have to figure out. But he has to get that 3-point percentage above even last season's 40% to get the bang for the buck that the Heat expect.
Really kind words, Juan, Hawaiian Punch. Really appreciate what you guys have been saying in the chat. That means a lot to us. Ira, real quick, any other takeaways, anything we haven't hit on that you took away from either media day, first day of practice, or anything that people can read in the Sunset?
It's interesting. We spoke about this last week. The question I would ask Eric about going big, and Eric still danced around it, Eric Spoelstra, about whether he would, and he'll consider it. So maybe now with the preseason starting, before we're back on again next Wednesday, they have a Monday game at home against Atlanta, that preseason opener. Maybe we see it a little bit more, because to me, Clay, against Capella and John Collins, if I can see if Bam is comfortable enough defending a John Collins, and if a Dedmon or a Yurtseven can keep Clint Capella, who destroyed the Heat on the boards in moments of truth last season, that could be an eye-opener to that. Or maybe I'll see instead that maybe with PJ Tucker's big, thick torso, maybe that keeps Clint Capella off the boards, and we see more of where Eric Spoelstra is going. So we could have some meaningful and tangible preseason moments when we talk again and when we talk through this upcoming month. I think there are moments I want to see. I don't watch a whole preseason game, take the box score, and say this is meaningful. But I hope to get snippets, a couple of seconds here, a sequence there, a play there, where I could at least get a little more insight into Eric Spoelstra. You talk the talk on media day. You say whatever you want. But now at least you and I will be able to break down the film here and say a little bit more. Well, Spoelstra said this, but he did this instead. PJ Tucker said he could do this, but instead we saw this. So I think I like the fact that it's all starting. We've gotten through this period. We know who the Heat are. We know their roster. We know against the tax, the 14 players that'll make the standard roster. We know they're two-way players. Personnel aside, now what happens and how do you utilize that personnel? That's what these coming weeks are about.
And I'm fascinated to see Bam. I really am. I want to see if this was an intentional thing, putting on the weight so that he can play more inside, something that many Heat fans
and I think the fact that you embedded that chip on his shoulder, you know where he is at all times right now with your Bam tracker. So at least there's that.
I know that he's at McDonald's. He's getting all the calories that he needs, and then he's going to the weight room. And then I want to see and I asked Kyle Lowry about this. He said that his job is to make Bam Adebayo feel like he's Superman. And he said, how I do that is I keep feeding him, but I also feed him mentally. I make sure he knows that he can do whatever it is that he wants. So I want to see defensively, I want to see, does Bam Adebayo play the center role more? Is he able to get the defensive rebounds, do the things that really plagued the Heat in that Bucks series? And then offensively, I want to see, how is that dynamic working? Is he playing more like remember Kyle Lowry and Serge Ibaka? There was this real relationship that they had on the floor that was fantastic. That's what I want to see. And even Serge Ibaka mentioned that. A couple of comments as we get out of here. Michael, Hawaiian Punch, man, so good to have you guys. We feel like we're building a little bit of a community here. Love it. Ira, next time we talk, we're going to have a game to talk about. I'm looking forward to it. What are you most looking forward to as we get out of here?
Just like I said, to see what happens in the preseason. Next week, I'll be talking to you, flying off to Houston for a preseason road trip against Houston and San Antonio. We'll have a little better sense. The words will be done. There'll be action in place. We'll get to see who they are, how they're going to play this thing out. Be back with Big O on Friday with our accurate Pembroke Pines report. And then again, you next Wednesday, again, 9 a.m. We want to get people up and early, know what's going on. And basically, so as soon as I'm done, I can drive down to practice.
All right, get out of here. Get out of here, Ira.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for hanging out, guys. More Big O Radio Show next.
This is the Big O Show.